Scotland FM at 4 minutes past 9.
Hi, Mac, did you see him as he come down the Gorgie? A war the Lammerl or north o' the Tay? Yon man is coming, and the hail tune is turning out. What a share he'll win back to Glasgow the day. The joiners and hodders on our marching frae Clydebank. Come on now and hear him, here be our thrang to bide. Turn out Jock and Jimmy, leave your crans and your muckle gantries. Great John McLean's coming back to the Clyde. Argyle Street in London roads the route that we're marching. The lads frae the Brummel are here to a man. Aye, Neil, ward your hard-arms, you big heel and chuchter, get your pipes, mate, and march at the head o' the clan.
The stirring refrain of the John McLean March welcome you to this Guy's special edition of Speaking Out. For the morning we'll be blethering about a subject dear to the heart of Scots frae all the earts and pears, who to cherish our ain tongue. Most folk worry that our wains just haven't got the right kind of exposure to the words and saying their families unshazed without thinking. But other folk would hae you believe that there's no such language as Scots, that it's nae mair than a collection of local dialects. And some say it doesn't much matter if the next generation kens mair about American words than the ones their grannies were brought up on. For myself, I'd say you'd have to be Guy Glaikit to see that the Scots tongue has a richness which couldn't be matched by mere English. Let's meet some folk ready to give us their thoughts. John Stirling is the president of the Scots Language Society in Glasgow. Duncan Mackay left school this year. Barbara Ann Burnett is a 17-year-old singer from Fraserburgh. Jock Duncan recites Doric poetry, and Karen Essen is compiling a dictionary in Arcadian. And the line-up are all over the place in Scotland today, and all the earts and pears, as we were saying. John Stirling, the Scots Language Society has done a lot to try and keep Scots alive, but is it working?
No, really. It's a sair fecht, and it'll take something by honour to make it work now. There's our many folk in the Scots Language Society who never use Scots. They ken all about it. They ken the grammars, they ken a lot of the vocables, but it never comes out their mouth. So what chance have we got with folk like that? You hate to speak a lead to keep it alive. I think you lose that's the case.
I think I would, but yet at the same time, if you don't have folk joining the society with who are well motivated, even if they don't have all the words, then you're not going to broaden your campaign, are you?
Oh, that's true, and we ettle to do that, but you, at the end of the day, you hate to get folk to use the lead as best they can, and the only way to do that is to speak with folk that ken a bit of Scots, who can give you a he's up as you gang along. That's what's happening to me. I'm just a learer myself, despite
You're
the fact...
doing not bad for one. Let me bring in Duncan here, because Duncan, I mean, I suppose this might have all passed you by as well, but for the fact that there was a schools project that interested you in Scots.
Yeah, that's right. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. When I went into 6th year, there was a local writer called Matthew Fitton. He came along to do a bit of teaching in the school, and he writes in Scots, and he got us all interested, the wee group of 6-year studies kids, and and up until then I hadn't thought of myself as being a writer or doing any writing, because I found it really difficult to write in English. But as soon as I was introduced to Scots, it just opened a new door. I could...
Well, that suggests to me if it was easier, then obviously what was going on in your head and your imagination was going on in Scots.
Yeah, definitely. As soon as I was able to write the way I spoke, it just came out more naturally.
Except you're speaking off a post.
I know, it's my radio voice.
Already a radio voice. What about your home environment, Duncan? I mean, do they speak Scots kind of naturally around about your home?
Yeah, not broad, but a lot of...
Use the words?
Yeah, just the older, like my granddad and my gran and everyone speak more than my immediate family, but...
That, I think, is really the pillar of it all, is the granny and grandpas, if they keep it going. But Jock Duncan, in your neck of the woods, of course, it's well, we're in the middle of the Doric festival, aren't we? But do you think Doric's in danger from the fact that a lot of Doric words pertain to things that are no longer part of folks' lives?
I agree with you, and it's what they're doing in my... Well, I'm 71. What they're doing the last 50 years, 50% at least. I mean, they didn't speak... My father's generation used to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In the same way, the days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, fears they tried it. This is the way they get on at that time. That's all dormant.
But what about your own family, your own wains and grand wains, if you have them?
Well, I moved to the northeast a lot of years ago, and they have a pear-shaped twang, and proud of it.
So they've lost the Doric by and large, have they?
They've lost the Doric, but they can every word I say and nobody else's. But they've got a new tongue. There's nothing wrong with pear-share dialect.
If you like that kind of thing, no. Tell me, Jock, what did you do for a living?
Well, I was half a lifetime with the hydroelectric again in North of Scotland, hydroelectric at that time.
The reason I was asking was that I suppose an awful lot of Doric was nurtured and nourished and came from the farming community.
Aye, and that's a population that's more or less extinct now. You see, as a vast depopulation happened in the 50s and 60s, and it's accelerating all the time, you see. Oh, vast the population, and that was the folk that spoke a living Doric. But if you go back into landward areas, by all Meldrum and all Rain, they're bred, and it's great to hear.
Well, it's great for me to hear you, and it's also great to think, though, that the Doric festival is not something that, as you might have expected, something that's been going on for donkey's years that was dying out just now. It's something that didn't happen, and there was sufficient interest for it to start up just 3 years ago, and it's going great guns now. So presumably there's a lot of young folk are quite keen on keeping the language alive.
There is, and Barbara on here especially. But that's the heartland again, Strichen-Toon, you're one in the bread tongue area again, you see. In their festival here, we get a festival here every year, and I listen in for 9 o'clock, from 9 o'clock in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, and there's non-stop reciters of the bread Doric.
It does your heart good.
It does me a heart of good, and I enjoy it.
Barbara Ann, you're kind of at the other end of the age scale, but Jock reckons it's because you come from a Doric heartland that you've managed to keep the language alive. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I started quite early. I went along to a lot of the festivals. The one Jock mentioned, the Buchan Heritage Society Festival in Strichen. I remember going along one year and seeing people taking part, and I thought, I can do that. So I learnt I learnt a couple of songs and went along the year after, and I think I came third or something. And I really enjoyed it, but also my home environment has helped a lot. I picked up a lot of Doric from my grandparents. My grandfather sang. I come from a farming background myself, so I've been immersed in the Doric since a very young age.
What about that sort of the conflict between that and contemporary culture? Because I suppose if you were to take a straw poll in Scotland, there'd be a lot more 17-year-olds interested in Blur and Oasis than interested in Doric.
Well, this is it. I find, certainly in my own age group in school, there's a few people involved, but I think it's probably because they don't know what they're missing. I think they'd really enjoy it if they got involved in all the music and the heritage, because it's so vibrant, it's so lively.
That's what I was going to ask you. What do you get out of it?
Well, I really enjoy the Doric and the music. I play instruments myself, and I get a lot of enjoyment out of it, going to the festivals, meeting people. It is a great way to meet people and broaden your horizons in that sense, and I think people my own age group are missing out on it.
Well, that's the worrying thing, I suppose, because presumably from what you're saying, there's not a lot of folk your own age group at the festivals. There's
not a great deal of people, but there's a lot of work done locally from where I come from in the primary schools. There's one in particular, St Combs Primary School, little fishing village. They always have a contingent of young people going to the festivals, and they do very well. And
so hopefully you're growing your own Doric speakers now.
Well, that's right, and it's good, and I hope that can continue in the other primary schools as well.
Well, let's have a quick word with Karen Esson in Orkney, because you've got a kind of slightly different problem, haven't you, Karen?
Well, yes. Our problem is that our dialect is not being used as much as it used to be, and a lot of the younger generation just don't seem to know the words.
Where does your dialect have its roots?
Mainly in Norwegian, but quite a number of the words have their origin in Scots too.
The reason I'm asking is because there's this eternal argument with which I'm having no truck that Scots is just a collection of dialects, that it is just the folk who speak in Ayrshire and the folk who speak Doric and the folk who speak all the other tongues and are actually just echoing a local dialect, and that collectively this doesn't make a language. But You know, I'm sure John Stirling would take me up on that. But if Arcadian is different in as much as it's not just from Scots, as you say, it's got a Norse origin. So do you think that makes you separate from this debate?
Oh, not at all, because dialect is important wherever it is spoken and however it's spoken.
I mean, what I'm trying to say is, do you feel Arcadian is a facet of the Scots tongue above all else?
I must confess that the answer to that would be no. We tend to be prouder of the Norse origins than the Scots origins.
OK, Mary Wallace is in the line. Hello, Mary.
Hello.
What did you want to say?
I don't know what I really wanted to say. I'm just terribly interested in the Scots language. My mother belonged to Glasgow. My father belonged to the Black Isle. I belong to Bamshire. My husband is a Fifer. So
That's a fair old mix.
It is indeed. And I do entertainments for the old people in Broad Scots sometimes, and they enjoy it very much.
Do you want to give us a wee swatch of what you do?
No, not really, thank you. I don't have it. Yeah, but
what decided you to make sure that when you did these entertainments that you did them in the Scots tongue?
Because they know where I come from and they know I can do it. So I've always been asked, do it the way that you speak it, which is Bamshire.
That's what I was going to ask you. So, but it's because of where you were brought up, and that was a more important influence than where your parents came from, or
I think so. Yes. It's fascinating. My children don't speak Broad Scots.
Is that your fault?
My fault, I suppose it is. Although at school, perhaps they weren't taught it. They were taught to speak proper, and it was frowned upon, I think.
Well, sometimes that happened at school, but sometimes it also happened in the home, Mary. There's no sense in which you thought your children wouldn't get on better if they spoke, quotes, proper English.
Maybe it is. I really don't know. I do speak the odd word now and again, and it has been passed on, I suppose. But they don't do it because they're not really interested. No, I don't think so.
Let me bring you in that, John Stirling, because I mean, where does the responsibility devolve here? I mean, obviously, the nicest thing would be if there was if you got input at home and at school. But if you're only getting it somewhere, what's the most important source?
At home, there's no doubt. There you hear it when I spoke earlier. That wifey that's just spoken, good soul that she might be, she doesn't ettle at all to speaking Scots, and I'm no the skilliest bairn in the world, and if I can learn and lear Scots, why can she not?
Why did you, John? You said
I saw it was going to dear war, and have I been interested in where I come from and what my roots are?
But you'd lost it and started it over again.
I'll give you a wee leet of words that I screeved down last night that I mind using at school and here in Glasgow when I was a bairn. That was lang syne. Words like civer, stank, roan pipe, lum dicht, dale, press, swatch, leash. You had a leash for your dog. You took your dog out in a leash. Scunner, shed.
But you didn't lock it in the press.
No. I could go on and on. Pernickety, bine, scale.
But these were natural words to you.
Aye, they were. You used swatch. I used to say to bairns at school, "Gives a swatch at your homework," and you didn't ken it was aught else.
But sometime between that period in your life and your adult life, you feel you lost all that.
Oh, aye. The first thing that happened, of course, was my mother saying, "You best not speak like that, you'll never get a job." And that's all through Scots education.
Let me just, Mary, come back to you before we lose you. In a sense that there's an irony here, because there you are doing entertainments in Scots to senior citizens, but you're not doing it to your own kids, and it's in a sense that you're giving it, you're preaching to the converted, but not to the unconverted.
Well, I suppose so. I really don't understand it. It's just that the old people like it, perhaps from their youth. That's how they spoke and that's how I spoke when I was a youngster.
But you've lost it all.
No, I haven't. No.
But I mean, in general conversation, you don't use it.
That's right. My intonation is North, but the words are not there as a rule.
How do you feel about that, Duncan? The fact that it's become, for somebody like Mary, who's obviously very interested in it, nevertheless, Scots has become a party piece rather than a kind of integral part of how she lives her life.
Well, it's a bit like that for me as well. I mean, I don't speak. It's not obvious that I speak in Broad Scots. I don't, and I couldn't. When I got taught. I didn't switch straight away to speaking Broad Scots.
But you can.
But I can to a certain extent. It's easier writing it down and then saying it, just to find out what the words mean. And
how much, for instance, do you understand of what John's saying?
I just understand.
Naturally.
Yeah.
tune into that. Now, there's another thing we haven't explored, which is the sort of geographical niceties. For instance, Barbara Ann, how much? I mean, do you recognise a lot of John's language, or is a lot of that foreign to you?
I can recognise some of it, certainly. A lot of the language that he's using is used by myself and my own family. I'm used to it. But I think you're right, it does vary across the country, and I think that's why it's important to keep the language going in different parts of Scotland.
Except that here are you and Duncan, who are both obviously keen, and they're both well motivated, and Duncan now writes in Scots, you sing in Scots and always have done, and neither of you are using Scots on this programme, which is about keeping Scots alive.
Well, I think it's unfortunate. I'm just worried in case people might not understand me.
Well, you just go for it. We're perfectly happy. Jock, I'm sure, is not going to stop speaking Doric for the great Scottish public, are you, Jock?
No.
All right, then I'll get a go then.
That's better. Jock, you're involved in poetry recitals, I know, at the Doric Festival. How useful a tool do you think is poetry for switching people on to language?
Oh, they fair enjoy it. You see, you get all your expression out. I mean, there's no...
You couldn't translate that in English.
You cannot translate that.
No.
It's for all that you can... but your Bob Brown here is the master of the Doric poetry, so she hasn't stated so. But you're right enough. Folk is so interested in this. It's so expressive, you see.
I remember reading, Jock, and you probably know better than I will. I remember reading that initially Hugh McDermott said that he thought it was a waste of, well, not a waste of time, but he thought it wasn't particularly useful to write in Scots, and then later in his life realised just what you've been saying, that there were Scots words that had a whole wealth of meaning, and there wasn't really an English equivalent that suited the piece.
Oh, I don't know, he was Countermarsh's chiel, that was why, for a lot of years.
It certainly was.
We do need that kind of folk tea.
Aye, feisty folk.
We need that.
Karen Essen, are you fighting a lonely one-woman campaign in Orkney, or do you think there's a head of steam building up again for the Arcadian dialect?
Well, for a start, I'm not a lone woman. I'm just part of a group that are working to promote the Orkney language and culture, which is the dialect and in our history and things like that.
Do you get much help from there's a lot of celebrated expatriate Arcadians. Do they give you much help?
Well, not directly, but this is a campaign within the island, really, and within the education department in the first instance.
And are the education department on side?
Oh yes, very much so. That's where the initiative has come from.
Okay, Graham Burgess is in the line, and I don't know whether he's bilingual or not. Are you, Graham?
It depends what you mean by bilingual. I studied Scottish literature by accident, really, at university a few years ago now, and it was just a one-year course. But the sad thing about that was I actually didn't know there was a subject at university called Scottish literature.
Well, for many years there wasn't, of course.
Indeed, yeah, and it's still something that someone that taught me, one of my tutors once, went for an interview at an English university, and the person that was interviewing him said, no, you haven't any experience teaching English literature, but what was it you taught? What is it you teach at Glasgow? And he said, I teach Scottish literature. And the patronising person in the panel said, oh, is there such a thing?
Well,
you know, it's like I was advised that because there were too many people wanting to study English literature, then the department was accepting other subjects.
So you only went in there as
you
went in as a kind of overspill. Let's take a call from Dorothy Thompson. Hello, Dorothy.
I'd like to say, about 25 years ago, when I first came to Shetland, I taught in Britain's most northerly high school. At that time, the headmaster was lamenting the possible demise of the dialect, and I must admit, Ruth, that I thought he was havering.
But he wasn't.
But 25 years on, this is what's happened. Gradually, it's become the thing to speak after the incomers. I'm thinking of, the personnel at the NATO base, which make up a large part of the school's population.
Though the thing is, I share your dismay about all this, Dorothy, but the thing is that strikes me every time we start talking about this is that there is a fairly staunch rearguard action not now being fought, and I don't know if it's too little too late, but at least there is a real resurgence of interest, and it's really good that people of Duncan and Barbara Ann's age group are as keen as anybody else.
Absolutely. And that package, Kist to Kisty, the wonderful Scots poetry, has come into all the schools here, and it's wonderful stuff.
Isn't it grand, though?
It is great.
Do you think that might make a difference in the longer term, you know, the next generation round?
Well, I think the interest is going to stay. I hope they speak perfectly, because they're doing it such a lot over the telephone to the Danes and the Norwegians in connection with the fishing.
Yeah.
But when they talk among themselves, they're still very broad and more power to their elbows, you know.
Do you think, though, that as we've been saying all along here, that the problem sometimes is that people who have got that facility not only don't pass it on to their wains, but actively discourage their wains?
That has certainly been, that charge has been laid at some people's doors right enough.
John?
There's another angle to this, if you like. Even folk that didn't speak Scots, they knew, sometimes speak in the constructions of Scots. I'm thinking of things like, what could you cry, the possessive pronoun, I'm going to my bed. Folk in England would just say they're going to bed. But we in Scotland, we used my and going to the school. So that's all part of language today, apart from just words.
Is the grammar important, though?
Of course it is. And there's another thing that fascinates me about the whole thing is there's a routh of folk here in Scotland and in England and further the country altogether who think that Scots is just a peasant language and it's just used in ilka-day speech and there's no higher register of it. But that's not true either. For here a lot of words I've put in down, just to get through one or two of them, I'll not fash you with what they mean really, but McKintness, Sinistrus, Percunand, Vocavals, Parify, Intimers, Sindriness, Windeval, Bibliotheca.
Do you know what?
So what am I telling you? That these were words that would be used by lawyers, doctors.
I appreciate that, John, but you know what it strikes me, the more I listen to you, is that you're a man who has now got so immersed in this and you've gone for it in an academic way, and that's almost separate from imbibing it naturally. So maybe you're more...
there must be a danger there, aye, but it's I'm just trying to set out that these Scots, the status it should have, that...
Let me try that out on Barbara Ann, because I suppose from the kind of place you come from, I mean, you obviously wouldn't regard Doric as a peasant tongue, but that is open to that kind of accusation, I suppose.
No, it's not a peasant tongue. I think Scots does deserve a higher status in Scotland. I think it would be far better if it was taught in schools to a greater extent. When I did my higher English, we studied Sunset Song by Lewis Grassic Gibbon, and I found that I could identify with the book because of the way it's written. I enjoyed reading that, and I think I would have benefited, my entire class would have benefited from more Scots input in our higher English.
When I was talking to John about that, John was saying that he was a bit disappointed in Lewis Grassic Gibbon because although all the dialogue was in Scots, the narrative was in standard English, and I was saying as a kind of non-bilingual person with an interest in Scots that I probably wouldn't have been such a fan of Grassic Gibbon if it all been in Scots and I'd found it a bit impenetrable.
That's right, you wouldn't have been able to enjoy the book to the same extent that you could if it was, bilingual, written in the Scots and in English.
You've got to it's really got to be, for people who are starting from scratch, you've got to have some sort of point of access like that, haven't you?
That's right. I think, I really enjoyed it myself. I know that the higher English course does offer other choices. I mean, you can study Burns and George Mackay Brown also, but my school only did Sunset Song, and I think the rest of the people in my year would have benefited from a greater input from the Scots.
It's a bit depressing, listening to this, because there's Duncan from almost the borders, as we were discussing, and only really is getting exposed to Burns and Scott, who are sort of geographically part of where he's coming from, but not necessarily, far from being the full canon of Scottish literature. Because of where you are, you're getting Grassic Gibbon and Mackay Brown, but neither of you are being exposed to the full range of Scottish authors.
No, that's right. Go back to the woman, the caller from Shetland. I was actually up in Shetland a couple of years ago in an exchange trip, Muckle Mingle, and I really enjoyed that. It was fine because there was a mixture of the cultures, the Shetland culture and the North East culture. And
that's a wonderful name, that. Muckle Mingle.
Yeah, it was. It's great. And I found it was wonderful because a lot of the words, the way they speak in Shetland, a lot of it's similar to the way they speak in the North East. Although there's an influence from the Norse up there also. I found it really stimulating. I really enjoyed that.
Jock, are you a travelling man, or have you spent most of your life in the one patch?
Well, most of last over 30 years in the same part. But I was up in Caithness away for and they've got a great lingo of their own. You just have to hear some of the old lads Doric Ogle, for instance, Stepster Bales. You didn't get a word he said on about. Just the real down to earth stuff you get.
And how far is Caithness in sort of as the crow flies from Aberdeen?
Oh, it's 200 mile or more. 250 mile maybe.
So in a comparatively short space, travelling space, I mean, you can get almost a completely fresh set of dialect words.
Oh, aye. There's an awful lot. It sounds a wee bit of Irish. Again, the Caithness dialect, but awful fine to listen to. It's awful fine to listen to. There was another thing. There was somebody mentioned a while back. This is changing the subject a wee bit. About getting Scots drilled out of them at school.
Aye.
We never got that. We never got them drilled out of them at school. But I'll tell you, if it I've seen many a time, and that was young parents drilling out of their bairns.
Yeah.
Young parents speaking bread Doric to themselves, but drilling out of their bairns, thinking it wasn't polite enough.
I think it's more the case nowadays than it was when Jock was at the school. My own parents certainly encouraged me to speak the Doric. We've always done that at home, but at school it's been less the case. They weren't so keen. It was always frowned upon speaking the Doric, and you had to speak proper, as it were.
I'm thinking, listening to both of you, and listening to what John Stilling said a minute ago, that maybe because of the kist, Scots will be accorded the respect by parents as well as by pupils in the next few years that it's lacked before. Because if the educational establishment have decided that it's worth doing properly, then it's not going to be a fringe event.
That's right. It's certainly very important that it's kept going, and I think the festivals that go on across the country are very important in this. I know, I attend quite a lot of them, and Jock attends a lot of them himself, and they're essential in keeping the Doric alive. A Doric festival that's going on just now, for example, in the Inverurie area, I'm involved in that to quite a big extent.
I wonder, Duncan, you see, in a sense, Barbara's got the festivals, and Jock, indeed, I mean, that's a sort of, something that's happening in their lives all the time and regularly, and that's keeping out their own interest bubbling. They're meeting other people, and it's, it's got, as Barbara was saying, a real vibrancy for her. What do you do, though? You leave school and you've left that writing course and you're kind of on your own now. What do you do to keep the language rich for you?
Well, because people like the guy who taught me Matthew Fitt are still around, there's always things going on. Like we had a festival of Scots in poetry and song called How Dum Deed, and that was all in Scots. And for National Poetry Day we also did workshops for the school kids in Scots, and just things like that.
So you guys are engaged in missionary work as well, with the younger schoolies. Well, that's all very comforting. I think Margaret's on the line. What did you want to say?
I wanted to say that having left Scotland, Dumfries actually in 1952, and going away out to Bulawell, and it was then Southern Rhodesia, and having to take my father around with me to get myself understood, it was a bit of a sod, but I found that as the time went past, when they heard an accent, they say, "Oh, that's different," and you got attention.
How long were you away, Margaret?
I left in 52, and I came back in May this year.
Well, I have to say, your accent's pretty well unimpaired.
And it's opened a lot of doors.
I'm sure it has. We haven't really talked about that. Do you think there is a sense in which, while Scots sometimes put down their own tongue, that other folk really go after it?
It's alive and well from, as far as I know, to Bulaware to Cape Town. There are more Scottish than the Scots out there.
Yes, well, we all know the first thing two Scots do when they arrive in a new country is start a Caledonian Society.
And St Andrews nights and all that. And I'll tell you another thing. People of Scottish descent, when they meet you, all of a sudden, I think it's because nostalgia pops in. They remember their mother and their father, and they start speaking to you. Now, several people, I thought they were Scottish born and bred. But then all of a sudden they discovered they're not. They were born out there. But they knew all about the press and the Simmets and the Oxters.
And that's because they've, in a sense, that's what I was saying to John a wee minute ago, that's them making a really studied, conscious effort to pass on words.
I don't think so. I think sometimes with us Scots, where we go, we always leave a wee bit of ourselves there, whether it's our mother tongue or our Scottish heritage, whatever it is. I think we always try to say, I'm a good Scots person, here I am, and wherever I am, and it doesn't matter if it's Africa, Australia or Canada.
The Tartan Mafia.
Well, that's it. And I think, you know, and when you come back and you hear the dialect and you think, oh my gosh, what are they saying?
Do you think then, because it's interesting to get a perspective of somebody who's been away for so long, so then, if you can remember back to when you went away and now, Margaret, do you think we have lost a significant amount of our own?
Oh, no, doing amongst these Doonhamers here, half the time I don't know what they're saying.
So the Dumfries Doonhamers are still...
Oh, well, even I went to a dentist the other day and he's Finnish. And he says, oh, you were born here. He said, oh, why? You're a Doonhamer. I mean, he's only been here a year.
And he's already got the message.
Well, this is the thing, you see. But also, too, sometimes it can cause a bit confusion if, you know, I used to forget, I think, that people, once they got to know me, understood me. And especially going into shops.
Aye.
You know, or speaking to your neighbour, and he'd say to you, oh, do you like these flowers, Margaret? I said, oh, they're absolutely lovely. How much did they cost you? And the answer was, oh, they're pink. And you think, oh, I wonder what that came out of.
Or maybe they're just nodding and smiling and not...
Oh, well, this is the whole thing, because communication, you know, when you go overseas is very important.
Well, it's really nice to have you back and still speaking and still being a dyed in the wool Doonhamer for all these years you spent abroad.
I know, it's absolutely marvellous to be back here, even if it's Team Doon, but I'm sitting here looking at all the sheep in the Galloway Hills and I think, oh, this is marvellous.
Aye, Team Doon's about right. It's doing that in Glasgow as well this morning. Thanks for all of that, Margaret. Dorothy Thompson, I think, is still with us. Dorothy, is that not glad in your heart?
Oh, that was delightful. And it just occurred to me, I recently visited a Shetland friend in Western Australia, and we toured, you know, a lot of Australia together, and as she said, in that great big country, almost everybody sounds the same wherever you go in Australia. And yet in this country, our country, you just go a few miles along the road and you hear, you know, a different speak.
Well, that was as Jock was saying. You know, Jock goes up to Caithness and he's needing a dictionary himself. And Pat Miller's on the line, I think. Hello, Pat.
Hello, hi.
What did you want to say?
Well, really, just that you've not got an awful lot about the borders on your
well,
programme.
fire away.
No, I'd better come clean because I'm not really a borderer. I've learned the lingo, as it were.
Where are you speaking from now, Pat?
I'm speaking for Jesuit.
Well, we've got, I mean, Duncan Mackay's a kind of almost a borderer.
Aye, real, but no, I mean, the thing is, I want to put my tuppence worth in for folk that pick up accents right quick, because I'm one of them. In fact, Scots is my second language, German's my first. I learnt the Scots when I went to the school, and then I had to learn English after that.
German's your first language?
Aye, I couldn't speak a word or anything except German when I went to the school first.
And then you learned then you learned English, then you learned Scots?
No, then I learned Scots. And then I had to learn the English because I was told that it's no good to speak like that.
Which was the easiest for you to pick up?
The Scots. Easy peasy. That's what other bands spoke.
And everybody round about you was speaking that?
Aye. I mean, it was a slightly different sort of Scots because I grew up in East Lothian.
I tell you what, I wonder, an awful lot of folk, I mean, I learned German at school rather badly, I have to say, but I found it a lot easier than French, and people always make the comparison because both Scots and German are quite guttural, and it's easier, they're more interchangeable, if you like.
It is, and I was across in Berlin in the summertime, and I was having to do just a wee bit of translating, and there was many a time I taught my host a Scots word because there just wasn't an English word that would fit in.
Clearly you should be on a commission from the Scottish Language Society. You may have to speak to John Stilley over this after the programme.
I mean, really, and it's just that I am one of these kind of folk that if I went to stay in Wales for a fortnight, I'd come back with a Welsh accent, and if I went across to Ireland, I can pick that up right fast and all. So there's an awful sort of purism about that says, oh, you're no through the borders, you're taking the mickey, how come you're speaking like us? And I just say, well, I cannot help it. Just the way it goes.
Do you know, I have to say to you, I mean, I could not have believed that your first language wasn't Scots, never mind English, never mind German.
I mean, I can speak English if you really want
No,
me
I don't. You're just a natural born genius, it's as simple as that.
Not at all. It's just the way it goes, and folk are encouraged to, sometimes by the very folk that speak the language, they do tend to get a wee bit possessive about it, and they'll say, oh, well, but you're not a borderer, you shouldn't be speaking like us. And I'm saying, well, why no?
Now that's it's a very good point. I'm going to come right back to John Stilling in that, because there's a sense in which when you were, sort of been slightly nitpicking, if I could say that, pernickety perhaps is what I should have said, John, pernickety about usage. Maybe we shouldn't get too purist about it. Maybe we should just let it wash over us the way that it did over Pat.
I will, but it'll dwine away in that, I would think. You hate to use as many, and it's no easy to do it. You hate to think it's that lassie there's brought it, she'd do it all day.
But the point is that she's not thinking, it's all coming out
That's
naturally.
What I mean. Aye, but how many Scots words had she actually spoken to us?
Well, it certainly sounded all right to me.
It was a word of tongue. The accent was there, but the
but
words...
are we going to get awful kind of,
Well, you're either going to be Scots speakers or not to be Scots speakers, and you need to use as muckle Scots as you can muster.
Barbara, and give me some support here for a halfway house, because I think if we start insisting that everybody piles Scots words into a sentence, whether or not it's coming to them naturally, then that's going to be maybe even a bit patronising.
I think so. I think it's important to let people make up their own minds about when they want to speak Scots and when they don't, because I think if you do that, they'll be more willing to get involved.
What about you, Karen Essen? Do you have that same sense of possession? Are you over-possessive about Arcadian? If somebody like Pat came to Orkney and started effortlessly speaking Arcadian dialect in 3 weeks, as I suspect she probably could, would that irritate the locals?
I don't think so. I think they would be quite flattered. Most incomers find Arcadian very difficult to take on board because of mainly, I think, because of the intonations and the sort of lilt that the Arcadians have.
It's a very pleasant lilt.
Well, maybe, but when we hear incomers attempting Arcadian, it never comes out right, because they can't get this intonation right.
I'm awful tempted to send Pat Miller up just to prove a point here.
Yeah.
We'll see if we can get back to her later. But let's take another call. Billy's on the line. Hello, Billy.
Hi, Ruth.
What did you want to say?
No, it's just I have a son who is in trouble at school at the present moment in time, and the root of it is because he insists on speaking Scots, and that's the nub of the problem. Any work that's done in the house can be completely undone by the school, because over the last 300 years, the educational establishment, like that in Catalonia and Galicia, have tried to destroy what is regarded as a peasant language.
Now that's an interesting point, because we've touched on that before, kind of the other way around, but most of the thrust of what seems to be happening now, certainly with the arrival of the KIST, is that the Scottish Education Authority, the Scottish Education Department itself, is very keen on Scots. So this presumably is down to an individual teacher, is it?
Well, you worry about lip service insofar as it's not the big general plan that you're worried about, it's what's happening in the day-to-day events in school.
Well, what kind of things happening to your son? I mean, give me a for instance.
Well, for example, it comes back to the classic case of if somebody says something and you agree with it or don't agree with it, my son will turn around and say, aye, sir.
Yeah.
That is not to be brooked.
And they want a yes.
They want a yes. They insist on a yes.
Now, I don't know if you remember, Barbara, that there was a court case about this when somebody... I'm suggesting for a moment that Billy's son's going to wind up in court, but there was a court case a few months ago where a guy got into trouble for doing exactly that, for saying aye, because that was, that was what he used. I mean, how do you feel about that? Did you feel when you went through the school system that there was ever that kind of discouragement?
I don't think so. Certainly not to that extent. When I was at primary school, I remember I could always speak my own language and teachers understood me, but you weren't allowed to take it too far. I mean, they let you say aye and things like that, but they didn't like you to speak in broad Scots. So I think it's quite sad that your son's getting in trouble for just speaking his language.
Have you gone to see the school about this, Billy?
We have a meeting next Monday. But the point is Scots language in schools, is it just an add-on, or is it the child's first language? Because with Strathclyde, you get a form in asking what languages are spoken in the house, and I insist on filling in the form as the spoken language is Scots and any other language in the house is English.
What about that, Duncan? I mean, do you think it's just an add-on? It's even though you had that very positive experience, it was just a kind of bit of tokenism in a sense?
I don't think it was an add-on. I think it was luck more than anything. I mean, I feel that Scots wasn't encouraged from primary 1 to 5th year. I mean, I didn't speak. I think I'm a victim of not being taught Scots and not being allowed to speak.
And in fact, if you'd been a year older, you'd have missed out altogether.
Yeah, that's right. And I think looking at, I mean, my dad's broader than me, and even my sister, who's 2 years older, is broader than me. So it's a shame
It's
that
getting
it's getting
diluted all the way down.
Yeah.
I think Pat Miller's still there.
Aye.
Pat, you don't want to have a wee bash at Arcadian, do you?
Not so quickly. No, I need to be up there for a couple of weeks, and I
Right.
could maybe.
We'll see if we can sort out some total immersion for you then.
No, but I mean, one of the other things I mean, that's right. I mean, I know that some of the border bairns get writing competitions in the schools and such like, and that's really good to see. And I know in the borders that the tongue is alive quite naturally. I mean, folks standing outside the supermarket will hire out kids' blether and they'll just yatter on, and it's still there. It lives. But when the bairns go to the school, by and large, I think they're no encouraged to say I, and they're just. They learn how to speak proper.
Something I must ask you before you go, Pat. When you're in Berlin, does anybody understand a word you're saying?
Oh, aye, no problem. I can speak very good German.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Let's take another quick call before we go back to the panel. Bill Waddell's on the line. What did you want to say?
Well, I'm just like to say that I'm totally confused because I don't know what this so-called Scots language is, to be honest with you. What I have heard is a confusion between dialect, usage, local accents. I mean, somebody said that they went abroad and they were understood. Now, they're understood not despite the so-called Scots language, they're understood despite their accent. I mean, we talk as if, and I've noticed, you can't help noticing, and worthy and all it is, that the name Lewis Grassic Gibbon has cropped up so many times. But, you know, the Doric of Lewis Grassic Gibbon is not the Doric of people in the Western Isles or people in the borders, and certainly not the Doric of the kind of Lanarkshire and west of Scotland that I grew up in. My father was a steelworker, well-read one, I may say, but he certainly would not have recognised the language from the northeast of Scotland as something to which he should adhere.
But what he would probably have recognised are a lot of interchangeable words, Bill, wouldn't he?
Oh, yes. Now you're talking about usage. Now you're talking about accent. I mean, let me be very clear. If I I lived and worked in London. Half of my family now live in London, I have, and so on. I don't change my accent. I don't put on posh Kensington BBC or anything like that. But I'm instantly recognisable as having a Scots accent.
But
I made a phone call from a public call in America last year, and there was an old fella sitting, and he looked up, and I was speaking to some members of some children at home and the telephone, and he said, "What kind of accent is that?" So, unmistakably a Scots accent. But I certainly wasn't speaking anything that I could have stood up and said, "Why I'm speaking Scots."
Right, now hang on just a second there, Bill, because I want to come to Jock here. Now, Jock, when you're thinking and talking about the Doric, where do you position that in relation to the Scots tongue generally?
Well, I agree with that gentleman, but you see, he's got a strong Scots accent, and he's an English. He's speaking English with a fine, broad Scots accent, and that's fine. That's a commercial language of the whole Scottish nation, I would say, and totally agree with him. But every district is the same dialect, and I never heard of such a thing as Doric when I was young. It was just where he had Scots tongue. And now it becomes Doric now, you see, but it was never known as Doric in my young day.
So what you're saying, Jock, is that that the Scots tongue just has regional variations, but it is a language with regional variations.
Of course it is. It's every area has its own way of spitting across.
Yeah, I don't think there's one definitive Scots language. I think it is split up into different areas, regional areas, and each of these languages are important in their own right and they need to be preserved.
But you don't. Well, I mean, John Stirling, I presume, would say that there is such a thing as the Scots language, and that there are.
There's a standard Scots. Mr. Wallace there is
Waddle, I
fast.
think.
Waddle, sorry. He's a bit fast about this business. But England speaks in dialects, for heaven's sake. Northumbrian, Geordie's impenetrable, but they speak it and are forstood in their own earth. And you can down to the Middle England and you hear fight for Birmingham.
But he says that we're getting confused between accents and usage and language.
I'm not sure. He's got me peer-heated, to tell you the truth. The whole thing is that there is standard English, and when it's appropriate to use it, you use it. You didn't get up in the House of Parliament as a representative for wherever and speak the way I'm speaking and hope that all the buddies in the other benches and the folk round about you are going to
That
ken.
might be a very entertaining prospect. I have to tell you, at this juncture, John, I'll spare his blushes, but an MP acquaintance of mine used to see how many Scots words he could get in Hansard, and he awarded himself 10 extra points if the Hansard writer had to come up afterwards and say, "Excuse me, what does that mean?" Anyway, let's take another call. Brendan Curran's on the line. Are you peer-heated with all this, Brendan?
Oh, not so much, no.
What did you want to say?
Listening to it all. I was speaking earlier on, you were saying about the languages and people passing the language on. I've been involved in sign language for the last couple of years. And it was striking me that, I mean, if you look at some of the Highlands and Islands, the official figures, if you like, says that there's over 17,000 hearing impaired people in the Highlands and Islands. That doesn't mean that they're all deaf, but I mean, when you come across the sign language, there's also, the kind of words that you would experience in Glasgow, and their kind of circular sign language, are kind of different for the words that you would experience in Dundee, and also different for the kind of sign language words that you would experience, say, in Stornoway as well.
Can signing move effortlessly between dialects then?
To an extent, I mean, sign language is almost universal. It's kind of like music, if you like. It's universal across the world. But each area will take on board some of its own words, and some of these own words will be passed down from, if you like, from the parents to the kids.
What I meant was that you can sign and still keep the richness of the local language.
Yes, aye, because obviously, as I say, words that are used in one part of the country maybe not used in the other part of the country. What tends to happen with sign language, there's kind of two levels of sign language. There used to be an older sign language called Makaton, and when the new kind of sign language came along, which is BSL, British Sign Language, the older people kind of thought, well, we're not going to go for this because it makes us sound stupid. It was a very kind of shortcut language, a lot faster. Mm-hmm. Instead of saying maybe, what is your name, you would sign your name what? And the older people thought, well, we're not going to go for this because it makes us look ignorant. It makes us sound stupid. But in terms of developing the language, expanding the language, it was a lot faster, and the younger ones took to it, obviously.
But did they also, in taking to it, use shortcuts that meant that they'd lost a lot of their own language, as it were, their own local language?
Not really, because what you tended to find was, I mean, you had the kind of instructional BSL that you would get for the schools or for the colleges or so on. What tended to happen was the youngsters would be coming back, and then at that stage maybe the parents would be learning sign language as well, so that the youngsters would, the language would expand. Then with the parents learning a wee bit more sign language, they were able to kind of export words that they knew to the children, if you like. So I mean, the words were passed on, the language has been passed down. So you will find kind of area or regional variations, if you like, in the kind of words that are used.
That's very interesting. Barbara Ann, I should say, when you're travelling about, how much variation are you aware of?
I find a lot of variation when I travel at the festivals in different parts of the country, down to Achtermuchty in Fife and Aberdeen Alternative Festival.
Fife's a particularly rich source, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very vibrant language down there. I find the variations, there are a lot of variations, but I enjoy it. It's a challenge trying to understand them, and I do understand a lot of the words, because there's a lot of the words that are interchangeable, and they're around in a lot of the different tongues in the different parts of the country, and so it's easier to understand, I think.
When you're writing, Duncan, are you aware of writing in a very specific dialect, or are you able to spread yourself into different variations?
Well, it's really Lanarkshire that I write, and the way I speak, I don't think about what dialect am I writing, and I just write the way I speak, and the sounds more than the words.
You haven't said a single sentence in Scottish yet. Are you going to before we run out of time?
Well, it would be like trying too hard. It's
unless it comes naturally, it's not worth it.
No.
Let me take another quick call. Colin Thompson's on the line. Hello, Colin. Hello, Colin.
Yes, hello.
What did you want to say?
Okay, it was just an observation about how languages can be passed on from parents to children. For 11 years, when my children were 1 and 2, my late wife and I moved to live in Yorkshire, and we kept speaking our own dialect in many instances, but perhaps a more we kept our Scots accents, but maybe not in the dialect all the time. But we always spoke to each other in our dialect, but our children never ever picked up our Scottish accent. When we come back to Scotland 11 years later, we found that they had perfect English accents and we still had a broad Scottish accent.
Well, I suppose, John Stirling, that just makes the point very well that you were making earlier, that there's absolutely no substitute for what kids hear when they're young.
That's it, exactly. Can I just say about Faut Shifting? My daughter is married now and bides in Essex. And
Essex woman?
Aye, just exactly. And she's on the phone back and forth to her mother and myself. And when you speak at her, what are you going to do at the weekend? She's now telling me that she's going out for some lunch. And she might go and buy some shoes. And I say, is it one shoe, 2 shoes, 3 shoes? There she's beginning to pick up alien speech for what she was brought up with. So I don't know what will happen in her end. She might turn out to be totally English and no Scots at all.
Barbara Ann, let me project you ahead very briefly. If you have kids, Waynes, how are you going to make sure that they pick up your heritage?
Well, if it's looking quite far in the future, but if I ever do, then I think it's important to start them along the same way as I started myself, the festivals. If they're interested, of course, I wouldn't want to pressurise them into involving themselves in the language if they don't want to. I think that's totally wrong. The key thing is to allow people to take part in it if they actually want to, and it's probably they'll enjoy it more if you do it like that.
Okay, thanks very much for that. We're going to have to say farewell for the day. Our thanks especially to John Stirling, Jock Duncan, Duncan Mackay, Karen Essen and Barbara Ann Burnett. Stay tuned to your national station, but from me, Ruth Wishart, it's goodbye for now.
My lads in Scotland will march again. No great John MacLean has come hame to the Clyde.
Scotland FM at 9:04.
Hi, Mac, did you see Hamazzi come down Begorgie? A war the Lammerlar north o' the Tay. Yon man is coming, and the hail tune is turning out. What a share he'll win back to Glasgow the day. The joiners and hodders on are marching frae Clyde Bank. Come on now and hear him, here be our thrang to bide. Turn out Jock and Jimmy, leave your crans and your muckle gantries. Great John MacLean's coming back to the Clyde. Argyle Street in London roads the route that we're marching. The lads frae the Brummelaw are here to a man. Aye, Neil, where's your haddrums? You big heel and chuchter, get your pipes, mate, and march at the head o' the clan.